What most people misunderstand is that Vikings did not fight moisture. They planned for it. In modern thinking, wet climates are treated as an enemy of wood. The goal is exclusion. Seal the surface, keep water out, isolate timber from soil and air. When failure happens, it is described as unavoidable. Rain was too heavy, ground contact too long, humidity too high. Viking Age builders lived in conditions that were consistently wet, cold, and seasonally hostile to wood, yet large portions of their timberwork endured far longer than modern equivalents. The lesser-known reality is that preservation was not achieved by sealing wood away from moisture. It was achieved by managing how wood absorbed, released, and equalized moisture over time. When this balance was respected, decay slowed dramatically. When it was ignored, failure was accepted as inevitable and planned around. This approach challenges modern assumptions because it requires patience, restraint, and an understanding of wood behavior that cannot be rushed or chemically substituted. Viking preservation began with accepting that wood will always exchange moisture with its environment. Wood is hygroscopic. It absorbs and releases moisture continuously, even after centuries. The Vikings did not attempt to stop this process. Instead, they worked to slow, harmful transitions while allowing gradual equilibrium. Timber that dries too quickly checks and splits. Timber that stays saturated without oxygen behaves very differently than timber that cycles between wet and dry. In wet, Nordic climates, builders distinguished between timber that would remain damp and timber that would periodically dry. Structural decisions followed this distinction. Posts set into soil were often expected to rot and be replaced. Critical load-bearing timbers were elevated, ventilated, or positioned where moisture movement was predictable rather than extreme. Preservation was not absolute. It was conditional, intentional, and honest about limits. Submersion, not dryness, was one of the most effective preservation methods. One of the most counterintuitive Viking practices was storing or using timber in permanently wet, oxygen-poor environments. Logs were sometimes left submerged in lakes, bogs, or tidal zones before use. This limited oxygen access, slowing fungal activity that requires both moisture and air. Archaeological finds confirm that wood preserved in anaerobic wet conditions can survive for centuries with minimal degradation. Viking ship timbers recovered from seabeds show remarkable fiber integrity, not because they were dry, but because decay organisms could not function fully. This knowledge extended to construction. Timber in contact with constantly wet soil behaved differently than timber exposed to alternating wet and dry cycles. The most destructive condition for wood is fluctuation. The Vikings minimized fluctuation wherever possible. Surface treatments worked by slowing moisture exchange, not sealing wood completely. When Vikings treated exposed timber, they used substances that moderated moisture movement rather than blocking it outright. Pine tar, fish oils, animal fats, and smoke deposits penetrated the surface layers of wood, filling pores and reducing rapid absorption. These treatments did not make wood waterproof. They made it slower to react. Slower moisture movement reduces internal stress. Fibers swell and shrink more evenly. Cracks form less readily. Modern sealants often form rigid barriers that eventually crack, creating concentrated failure points. Viking treatments aged with the wood. They degraded gradually and could be renewed without stripping the surface or trapping moisture beneath. Grain orientation and tool choice were preservation decisions, not stylistic ones. Viking builders favored splitting and hewing over sawing when possible. This preserved continuous grain paths and reduced exposed end grain. End grain absorbs moisture far more readily than face grain. By minimizing exposed fiber ends, they reduced rapid water uptake in critical areas. Tool marks visible on surviving structures are not evidence of crude methods. They are evidence of choices aligned with how wood behaves when repeatedly exposed to rain, fog, and ground moisture. Viking structures were not designed to be maintenance-free. They were designed to be repairable. Components most exposed to moisture were often sacrificial. Fence posts, lower wall timbers, and exterior planking were expected to degrade first. Modern construction often hides vulnerable wood behind finishes, trapping moisture and delaying visible signs of failure. When damage is discovered, it is often widespread and structurally significant. Roofs, walls, and floors were designed to shed water quickly while allowing air movement. Overhangs protected walls from direct rainfall. Gaps and loose joints allowed moisture vapor to escape. Smoke from hearth fires dried interior timbers and deposited preservative compounds on surfaces. Failure patterns taught builders more than success stories. Knowledge was accumulated through observation over generations. Timber that rotted too quickly was studied. Placement, species choice, and treatment were adjusted. This slow feedback loop refined practices that worked under specific environmental conditions. Preservation was inseparable from cultural attitudes toward time and replacement. Viking societies did not expect permanence from wood in the modern sense. Longevity was valued, but so was adaptability. Structures were maintained, altered, and rebuilt as needed. This reduced the pressure to make any single timber immortal. Modern expectations often demand decades of service with minimal intervention. When this expectation collides with wet climates, disappointment follows. What has been forgotten is not a recipe, but a way of thinking about wood. The Viking approach to preserving wood in wet climates was not a single technique. It was a system of decisions, grounded in observation: when to cut, how to shape, where to place, and what to expect over time. These practices remain relevant because wood has not changed. Moisture still moves through fibers the same way. Fungi still require the same conditions. Stress still accumulates when wood is forced to behave unnaturally. Wood endures not because it is sealed away from the world, but because it is allowed to live within it under controlled conditions. The Vikings understood that preservation in wet climates meant cooperation with moisture, not denial of it. Historical wood knowledge matters because it reveals how materials behave over time, beyond warranties and product cycles. If this kind of depth and long-term thinking is valuable to you, consider subscribing to the email list connected to this channel, where extended research and material not shared publicly is made available. Understanding wood is not about recreating the past. It is about respecting what the material has always required.